This is the moment we've all been waiting for the thousands in attendance and the millions watching around the world. Let's get ready to rumble!
Welcome to the Junkyard Pod. Today we are going to be recapping the first few days of NBA free agency, getting Jackson's thoughts on the Donovan Mitchell extension, how we feel about the Cavs being on inactive up to this point, and if there are any available free agents who are still worth looking at. Before we get started, let me say if you enjoy the Junkyard Pod, please consider hitting subscribe and dropping a like. It goes a long way to help the channel, and we do appreciate the support. But getting into today's episode, let me start here. Jackson, what are your overall thoughts on the offseason so far? Not just the Cavs, but the NBA as a whole. Have any deals or transactions stood out to you?
I think the Paul George deal is the one that does stand out to you because it feels like that puts the Sixers above the Cavs, and I'm not sure if, the Sixers are good with Embiid, obviously, in the regular season, but are they a team that you would consider above them? I kind of consider them in the same tier. Paul George, I think, takes them above where the Cavs are, and that's meaningful because, the Cavs, we're going to talk about this later, but one of the goals is to, get to the finals, come out of the Eastern Conference, and if there's more teams in the way, then you either need more breaks to go your way or you need this team to massively improve, which, it just becomes harder when there's more good teams there.
Yeah, and that I'm saving a question for you that I'm going to ask in a few moments here, but the Paul George move on paper definitely makes Philly a very strong contender. Of course, Embiid, his health, long-term concern. Paul George isn't exactly the easiest guy to sell yourself on when it comes to longevity and being healthy. But they are, again, on paper, a very tough team, so that's something to watch out for. I will say, I think one move that stood out to me, I think it's incredible that Chris Paul, at this late stage in his career, is going to forego ring chasing and help a young superstar unlock his potential in Cedi Osman. I really think Cedi could take that MVP leap that we've been expecting from him. And I hope Victor Wembanyama understands that CP3 is there to help unlock Cedi.
That's what's really important about this whole thing. But to get us back on track, I will say that even like the KCP move for the Magic is big.
Yeah.
Because if we were, like the Cavs didn't win that series very handedly. And,
you run it back with KCP there and he hits a couple of the shots that their guards and their wings weren't able to hit on the perimeter, gets a little spooky.
Yeah, the Cavs were down by 1 million in Game 7, and then they were able to come back because the Magic decided to go 1 for 1 million from 3 to kind of close out that game. If you have a proven shooter who's not going to be scared of a Game 7 first round because, hey, I've won a championship before, I've won 2 championships before, I've been in these moments, it's a very different situation. And it's at a position, it also allows them to be bigger or to stay bigger with actual, you're taking Gary Harris off the floor and you're putting KCP on. Like, that's a really big lineup. That's really versatile. And I think that, I think people on the outside, the national media, are going to probably go into the season thinking that the Magic are better than the Cavs. And I don't know if I really disagree with them. So that's where it's like, well, at least as things currently stand. So that's where, when we're talking about the Cavs not doing anything, we can give all these explanations about, well, it's tough, these mid-level guys suck, you don't have anything to trade, but it's also, well, what's the point of not being able to trade a first-round draft pick till 2031 if the Magic signing KCP just vaults them over you and there's no counter move that you can do? So that's where, I think some of the unease is very warranted.
And I definitely hear those concerns, and I'm going to transition to a question in one moment, but just to round out our general free agency reactions, I would say other than the Paul George move, the 2 moves of the summer so far, this isn't free agency, but the Mikal Bridges trade, I think was pretty big. Obviously, New York jumps probably ahead of Cleveland. Some people may have already had them ahead of Cleveland. And then Isaiah Hartenstein going to OKC is a pretty good move. I think he got a pretty hefty deal, but they really needed a center last year, and I think his passing is fun in that system. I'm a big fan of that move. But now the question that I want to ask, with all the moves that have been made, including the trades, has any team dethroned Boston as the favorites to repeat? Has the bar been raised?
Well, first off, I want to say that the Boston Celtics do in fact suck. So of course not.
You're a good person to ask this question.
um, I would say I don't know if these moves are how you beat the Celtics. Like, I don't know if you're ever going to outwing the Celtics in the sense of like, oh yeah, well we have Mikal Bridges, like we see your Jaylen Brown, we have Mikal Bridges, and it's like, is that really how you're gonna win? I'm not really convinced, but at the same time, teams are closer, and I think one of the things that we didn't see in the Eastern Conference playoffs for a wide variety of reasons is we never really saw a team push them. Maybe Donovan Mitchell stays healthy, the Cavs get one more game, then you're kind of seeing that some. So I could see a healthy Knicks team push them because I think the Knicks will be better next year than they were this previous year. And I think the Knicks would have provided a good matchup anyways. So I think it's possible that teams have gotten closer, but I don't know if they've really closed the gap because I think to kind of close the gap against the Celtics, you got to be able to beat them inside. Like, I don't think you're going to 3-point your way. Like, you're not going to be a better version of the Celtics unless you're the Thunder, who they seem to be kind of building the same exact team. So I don't know.
Yeah,
That wasn't really a great answer.
No, I get what you're saying, because I don't think any team has put themselves head and shoulders above the Celtics, but they have certainly moved into a position where maybe they'll be on the same level. Philly, again, on paper is fantastic, but again, you won't catch me buying into the health of Embiid and Paul George. New York is very good, and they now have a roster where it would be a battle of the wings. I think Boston's wings are better, but they're certainly the one team in the Eastern Conference, at least, that has the wings and the ideal matchups to go toe to toe with them. I would still pick the Celtics to win that series, but something we'll have to see develop. I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't. But other than that, you look across the league, Denver got worse, in my opinion. The Clippers are off the board. The Lakers were never really on the board to begin with. Minnesota is interesting. Dallas, OKC could definitely be a favorite.
I think it's worth talking about the Bucks too, because it's really easy to forget about them.
I would not forget about Giannis.
Yeah, he's still really good. I think the Bucks have a lot of issues, and like the Giannis Lillard pairing needs to be an A+ for it all to work, and just being okay isn't going to do it. So I don't really have faith in Doc Rivers as being the guy who cracks the code. But you can't discount a team that has an MVP caliber player and an all-star caliber point guard.
Yeah, I think the last two playoffs look very different if Giannis is healthy. I still think fully healthy, he could be the best player in the NBA still. I think he has a legit case for that. And look, I heard apparently Doc Rivers has said that Damian Lillard was out of shape last year, so maybe he manages to get back in shape and they compete. They certainly wouldn't be my favorite to win the East, but they're a
Did he
team
really
that I
say that?
either. Well, Bill Simmons said that Doc Rivers said that, so we're playing telephone at this point. Who knows? But I mean,
they are boys, but that's insane.
It's a bad thing for a coach to say.
But
it's a Doc Rivers thing to say.
Well, probably because Damian Lillard was the only guy who could dribble the ball, like, for that whole first round series. That may be it. Yeah. So I don't know. Maybe they need like a triathlon runner out there running the point, but anyways.
But yeah, rounding out the point here, I guess what I would say is that the competition in the East might have thickened. There's more teams that pose serious threats. I mean, look at the Eastern Conference, and Orlando, Indiana just made to the conference finals. Like, there's no easy path anymore. But I do think the bar to clear is relatively the same, if that makes sense. And so that's where the Cavs kind of find themselves like, hey, maybe these other teams have leapfrogged you, arguably, but where you need to go is the same destination, if that makes sense. You need to beat Boston. That was the bar last year. It'll be the bar next year. Even if New York ends up being the team that makes it out of the East, I still think that bar is relatively at the same point.
Yeah, that all makes sense. And you could talk yourself into the Cavs having a better chance if Mitchell's healthy, but it's
there's a lot of factors.
There's a lot of things there's a lot of areas that the Cavs need to improve, because for them to beat the Celtics like this past go around, even without Porzingis, which was, if they were going to beat the Celtics, it was because they didn't have Porzingis, and they needed so many things to go their way, and I think it's kind of just because you were relying so much on Max Strus, on Karis LeVert, on Dean Wade. Like, you can't rely that heavily on probably, like, not to say that any of those guys are bad, but I think the Cavs just rely way too much on them for, like, good teams can't do that unless they have, like, the best player in the league, and they do not have that.
I agree entirely, especially when it comes to Max Strus. He is a guy who I will be defending all summer because I think he's a very helpful player. The Cavs are just relying on him far too much. Now, before we talk about the inactivity of the Cavs so far and where they need to improve, I do want to give you a chance to quickly talk about the Donovan Mitchell extension. Now, I did a quick video with my instant reaction, but we want to get your thoughts on this. How are you feeling? Were you surprised? If we could go back in time to December 2023, and I told you Mitchell would sign the extension, would you have believed it?
Maybe. I probably would have believed it more than other people, and it's because I feel like, this is my first year covering the team. I am not plugged in at all. I am plugged out. So, like, nobody tells me anything. But just observing Donovan Mitchell, he seemed, especially during that time, he seemed the most bought in out of anybody else on the team. He would take losses more personally than I think anybody else would. And it just felt like he was really invested in the process, and that just continued throughout the whole year. So I always thought that he was going to stay just based on that, but I get that, I'm not actually like a source or anything like that. So, what I thought doesn't really matter too much, but I'm not surprised. And then obviously this whole summer, there hasn't been any rumors about him going. And as we were just kind of talking about, this free agency has sucked. So if there was any sprinkle of a rumor or anything like that, or any doubt whatsoever, I think that the media would have loved to have run with it, and they didn't. So that was just kind of like, it was just, Mark Stein for like 3 months straight, like, yeah, he's gonna sign an extension. It's gonna be a 4-year extension. It's gonna be a 3-year extension. It was just kind of like, it just kind of came down to the details. So I'm not surprised, but this is a huge deal for the Cavs. They mortgage their entire future, and for him to not be on the team when that first pick to the Jazz conveyed would have been very tough. It would have been very bad. So, like, this was the bare minimum that they needed to do, and this basically buys them 2 more years. So when you made the trade, you're like, we have 2 years to convince Donovan Mitchell to stay. You basically just got 2 more years to convince him to stay longer, which, so how do you do that? We've talked about how tough it is to improve this team with how, the new CBA, they don't have any draft picks to trade. Nobody, like, you're not like, oh, let's trade. We've talked about this the whole time we've been doing this pod. Yeah, let's trade Karis LeVert for Karis LeVert, but good. Like, that's just not a trade that's ever going to happen. So, like, Kobe needs to figure out a way to do that, and it's like, is Tyson, is he the guy who's gonna, is he like a home run?
Take a little while, but
right. But like, he's somebody who, like, if the Cavs are gonna take the next step, it's like internal improvement. It's trading one of the core 4, or it's like you just hit a home run, like Emoni Bates just flips a switch, which, like, we don't think is gonna happen, at least not in the way that some people do.
The YouTube comments will be on you, Jackson.
Right. Well, they're already on me. Like Craig Porter Jr., Craig Porter Jr. is not going to turn into, Chris Paul Jr. That was a good one.
That was a good one. Look at you.
So like, you know, they need to hit a home run essentially,
Mm,
or like there's limited paths for them to improve, and that's where I would start to get a little concerned because we've seen a pattern: first round, second round. Well, I don't think Mitchell's going to be like, okay, if they go first round, second round again. I don't know if he's
yeah,
like,
that
let
won't hit the same.
right. So where does the next step come? I think that's very important, but I also don't want to lose sight of how cool it is that an all NBA player who was not drafted by the Cavs wants to stay in Cleveland. He never said, like when he was traded, he never said I want to go to the Cavs. Like that wasn't any of the rumors out there. The Cavs made a bet and they hit on the bet. And Mitchell has been phenomenal. Mitchell, if he stays throughout the rest, like, if he stays for 4 more years, he has a chance of being pretty high up there on a lot of the all time lists for the Cavs, especially if he keeps staying. So, like, this is a huge deal. The Cavs haven't had many periods of sustained relevancy, not counting LeBron. You're looking
Like the
at like
'90s and LeBron. It's basically it.
right, like like the late '80s. So you're not, like this isn't a franchise that has had sustained success, and we'll complain about whether or not the Cavs can ever get over the hump. But
Mm,
Mitchell being on the team allows you to have a second round team, which is not something that the Cavs have been used to throughout the entirety of their franchise, excluding LeBron. So that's a
mm,
big deal. Like anytime you look at the stats, like he's one of 3 Cavaliers to make the first or second All NBA team. He's
mm.
one of 2 Cavaliers to be named Player of the Month. He could be,
Just great.
like it's just like this isn't a franchise that has had a lot of star power, or at least a lot of star power that has been able to stay healthy for a long period of time. Like Brad Doherty, he was really good, but he kind of flamed out because of injuries and stuff. So, same thing can be said about like Austin Carr. So it's a huge deal to say like, you know, 10, 15, 20 years from now, when you're looking back at the Cavs, you'll be saying like, man, that Donovan Mitchell guy was good. And, you know, we're kind of doing that right now. Sometimes when we talk about Kyrie, because enough time has passed where, yeah, he was really good, but it was more so like, well, you just kind of had to see it, and the playoffs were really good. It wasn't
Mhm.
like, yeah, this is a top 10 guy in the league. This is an all NBA caliber player. It was more so,
I think the
yeah,
kids call that aura.
yeah,
Kyrie had aura about him.
yeah, he did. He kind of still does, but it's just complicated. But anyways, moral of the story is like he if he stays throughout this contract, he will go down as one of the best players in franchise history, and that's really cool. So, like, it's a big deal from that standpoint.
Yeah, I agree. Everything you just said. Listen, I've already taken my victory lap, so I won't revel in it too much. But I knew I was right all along. And you know what? We can get back to talking basketball rather than debunking these narratives. Which, by the way, just for the record, I was never saying, "Hey, Donovan Mitchell's 100% staying in Cleveland." I was always pushing back on the idea that he is checked out and ready to leave. There was no tangible reason for us to think that he didn't like being in Cleveland, that he already had one foot out the door. As you said, he was the most committed player on the team
Mm-hmm.
through the whole season. And so I also want to say, hey, if 2 years from now or even next season Mitchell demands a trade, then okay, sure. But we're not moving the goalposts here. I never said he would retire in Cleveland. I just pushed back against the silly idea that he was desperate to get out. There's never a claim based in reality. And all the people who push that idea are dumb and wrong. And okay, that's the end of my rant.
Yeah, and I think Donovan's also somebody who really likes to be liked, and
Yeah.
I
Great PR
think
team.
I think Cleveland is a city who wants to like somebody, especially if they like show just a little bit of like,
A little
give them just a
desperate.
little bit. And that's not, like kind of to go back to Kyrie. Like I don't know, like, Kyrie was loved, but I don't
Yeah.
know if he wanted to be loved or really sought it out the same way that like a Donovan Mitchell does. So, and he didn't like pander to the home to the home crowd the way that Donovan does. And I think that kind of, like, that's a big part of it. And it's like, I think Donovan would like to be loved by the New York City, by the Knicks crowd, but it's not like a guarantee that, wherever you go, you're going to be loved. Is LeBron James loved in LA? It doesn't seem like it, like it's just, it's sometimes hard. So anyways, I think that kind of also played a part in it too. So I want to, point that out.
Yeah. I mean, realistically, I don't think what I'm about to say might be crazy, but I don't think it's that crazy. If Donovan Mitchell finishes his career in Cleveland, and even if they never win a championship, if he's just really good for a long time, he could end up getting a statue with LeBron James one day. So like that's where we are with the Cavs franchise. Some people might think that's insane. Donovan Mitchell's going to get a statue. Well, if he stays the rest of his career and they go to the conference finals or even make it to a finals, he's probably the second best player in franchise history at that point. Now, I'm not getting ahead of myself, knock on wood that all that stuff happens, but it's just kind of, that's how big this extension was, at least as a starting point.
Yeah, and a lot of the good players in the league tend to go to like one or two teams, and historically the Cavs aren't one of the two teams that they go to. That's why when you look up in the rafters, you're not actually seeing like a lot of great names. Like, no shots at anybody, but like, is Larry Nance getting Larry Nance getting his jersey retired by somebody else? Like, I love Zydrunas Ilgauskas. Is he getting his jersey retired by anybody else? Like, and the thing is, I'm fine with that because I think it's cool to celebrate the people who provided memories. So it's like, it's not a shot at like, yeah, like you shouldn't have retired Larry Nance's jersey. And that's why I think it's stupid. Like, oh, you guys can't retire the whole 2016 team's jersey because it's like, they're, like, how good is J.R. Smith? And it's like, dude, just retire Tristan Thompson. Like, retire the whole team. Because I'm with you. I want, like, if you're a fan, you want to go in and, like, look up and you're like, dude, Tristan Thompson, man. Do you remember some of those playoffs against the Celtics? He just killed them. He killed the death lineup in the 2016 finals. Those inspire memories and stuff. And I think that's okay and that's good. But at the same time, like, Larry Nance wouldn't have a special place in, like, if you're a Celtics fan. Like, Larry Nance is probably not somebody that you're going to remember. And that's, that's just kind of the difference between the Cavs and, some other more storied franchises. And that's okay.
And one day you'll be able to look up and see 3 Nance jerseys hanging up there, as we all know. Anyways, moving into our next topic. So as we said at the top, the Cavs are one of the few teams who have yet to make a move unless something happens as we are recording. Jackson, you already hit on this a little bit, but are you annoyed with their inactivity? Do you think they are squandering opportunities, specifically in free agency? I'm not referring to any potential trades. We can get to that in another episode. What are your thoughts? Should the Cavs have signed someone by
now? It's hard to, like, there hasn't been a name that's popped up on my phone with the Woj notification that I've said, man, like the Cavs should have got that guy. So from that standpoint, it's like, no, I'm not really mad with the inactivity, but you would like to at least see something because there's such a limited amount of ways to improve this team, and they currently have the mid-level exception. They're likely not going to have the mid-level exception next year, or at least not the full $12 million mid-level exception. So you would like to see them do something to bring in somebody who can give you, like, real minutes. And I know there's like, well, none of these guys are any good. Well, check this out. Like, Marcus Morris was playing...
Came off the couch.
Yeah, and was playing heavy playoff minutes. And you can say, well, yeah, it's because everybody got injured on the team, and it's like true. But also, the guy that they got in free agency last year with their mid-level exception wasn't playable, so he was playing over him. And it's like, this isn't to say like, oh, like Morris was good, like he wasn't good. Like, that's the thing. It's just he was better.
Final game of the season, he was on a heater. He played out of his mind that game. That was crazy.
It was crazy.
It
was great. Yeah. But so, like, the bar to clear isn't that high.
It's not even elevated. You can step right over it. there's a glaring hole on this roster who anybody who's 6'7" and can shoot above 35% would fill
or dribble
immediately. Or dribble, yeah.
Like we just got the notification before we came on that Taurean Prince got signed by the Bucks, and it's
Would
like
instantly been in the 8-man rotation
for sure. Like Taurean Prince isn't,
and it's Taurean Prince.
Like yeah, like I don't think
he's not making you a contender.
Like I think we talked about this. Like Taurean Prince is a better stats guy than he is a player guy, but you know I think there would be a real argument that Taurean Prince should start over Max Strus just because of his
size.
His size.
Strus
like,
would be better off the bench too. I think it makes the team better and Strus better.
Yeah, and Max Strus is more naturally a 2. He probably shouldn't be like starting the game, running around guarding, Jason Tatum. So, yeah, like that's where it's like, I didn't see Taurean Prince's name show up on my phone. It's like, man, like the Cavs should have gotten him. He's so good. But it's more like, yeah, he could have helped. He would have been better than anybody else. He can play a little bit of 4. So it's like, yeah, they just need options, and they don't, they need somebody. And as we're going to go through later on in this list, some of these guys suck.
Well, I've talked myself into some of them, so we will get to that a little bit later. But yeah, I mean, listen, there are players who have been signed who I wish they could have gotten. Overall, this free agency class, it's nothing to lose sleep over. With that said, it'll be inexcusable if they walk away empty-handed. In my opinion, they need to get something here. Just as you mentioned, you probably won't have the MLE next year. Now, who knows? Things changed in the NBA. But none of the guys that you missed on right now would have moved the needle. But I do think striking out altogether would be really bad. They need to bolster the supporting cast one way or another, and this is your best shot at doing it without a trade.
It's one of the things where you want to hit like singles and doubles with your mid-level exception. You're not going to hit a home run with it. So you need to like get guys who help because, some of the framing like, Max Strus is going to solve all these problems was wrong at the time and looks really stupid when you look back like a year later because it's like, yeah, Max Strus is good. He's not, he's not Mikal Bridges, and like it feels like that's kind of how it was framed. But like you're not going to be on there's no mid-level signing that's going to get you onto the Celtics level or like to vault you above some of the other teams that we mentioned. But you need a bigger margin of error. And right now the Cavs don't have a big margin of error because it's like, you don't really have a whole lot of useful tools.
I think one other thing that I want to mention as far as this summer goes, just a general statement on the state of the NBA. I think we have to adjust our expectations a little bit, and this goes in line with what you were saying. Fewer teams are selling than really ever before. Usually every summer and in the trade deadline, you have all these teams who are interested in selling their assets for draft capital or to facilitate a rebuild. But right now we have a bunch of teams who feel like they are 1 or 2 moves away from actually competing for a title or even just like a lucky break away from making a conference finals run. Think of Indiana last year. And so add that with the lack of incentive for teams to tank now because of the flattened lottery odds and the fact that teams aren't as interested in trading their assets. You don't have as many options out there. It's a different landscape, and that's not even mentioning the second apron in the new CBA.
I will push back on that because you can get playable players. Like Portland just got Denny Avdija. I can't say it.
I think it's Avdija.
Avdija. There we go. They just traded for Denny, and I think Denny would be a perfect fit on this team. They didn't give up a ton, but they gave up draft capital. And what do they like? What can the Cavs not trade? Draft capital. So that's where it's like where the little moves that could really help, you're not going to be able to make because Washington is never going to say, "Oh, yeah, we'll take care." Well, okay, Washington might say yes because they're crazy.
Yeah.
But most teams aren't going to be like, "Oh, you're trading me Karis LeVert. Here's Denny. He's actually a better fit and a better player." Teams just aren't going to do that. So that's where the Cavs, it's tough because I think free agency is a little weirder, but there are avenues to improve the team. It's just the Cavs don't have like access to those avenues.
Yeah, like I think of the Cam Johnson rumors. Is Brooklyn, if they're facilitating a rebuild, they're going to trade Cam Johnson? Do they want, what use are they getting out of Karis LeVert and George Niang?
None.
I mean, they want draft capital. So again, you have to keep in mind, Cavs fans and really just NBA fans in general, this is not exclusive to Cavs fans. You are not the only team bidding on these players. I am sure, well, I would hope that if Brooklyn called Kobe Altman and said, we'll give you Cam Johnson for Karis LeVert, I would hope Kobe Altman would accept that, or at least strongly consider it. But I don't think Brooklyn is. I think Brooklyn will get a better package than Karis LeVert and George Niang.
Right, and that's kind of the whole thing where it's really tough to improve this team, and the only way to really improve this team is to trade Jarrett Allen, and that's what brings into the question: are you improving this team, or are you just like, is it just a lateral move? And this is a question that I want to ask you. I hope we're late enough into the pod so the commenters don't yell at me about this. Because
you never know. They'll find a way.
One thing that's really funny, I do want to say, like, people on Twitter are always like I've seen, like, Cavs fans are way too high on Brandon Ingram on Twitter from, like, 8 different people. And I'm like, every time I say something positive about Brandon Ingram, I never get, like, a Jackson, you're so right, like, handshake emoji. It's always, Jackson, you're the dumbest person alive. So I don't see that. But if you were going to, like, the only avenue you have to make a trade is Jarrett Allen, essentially, because I don't think you're trading Darius Garland, and it would be dumb to trade Darius Garland. Like, teams don't want point guards right now. There's a lot of, if you could make a Allen and LeVert for Brandon Ingram move, I think you would do it, and this is kind of why. What is the best version of this core 4 next year in your mind? Like, what is their absolute ceiling?
You mean like how far do they go in the playoffs, or are you asking?
Like, what's their best ceiling if you keep this core 4 together next year?
Just for next year, yeah. I would say. I'll start this way. I would say their goal should be the conference finals. I think they should absolutely plan on making it to the conference finals. I would be slightly disappointed if they didn't. Now, there's way too many factors for me to like put that in stone. I see where you're going with this. I know. The thing is, I don't think their ceiling necessarily changes with Ingram in place. But I will say to what you're mentioning, Allen for Ingram is more reasonable to me than like the Garland for Ingram swap was never very interesting to me. If it's Allen for Ingram, you could talk me into it. I'm still hesitant, but you could definitely talk me into that, raising their ceiling more than the Garland swap was.
So I think this current team's ceiling, if everything hits perfectly, I think they could make the conference finals, but I don't think they could make the finals. Yeah. Just because I don't,
they would need a lucky break.
Well, right, like if they made it to the conference finals and then like 3 people got injured, in the series from the other team, then it's like, okay. But you know what I mean? It's like I think that's kind of their ceiling, and I think they'd be good to hit that ceiling. I think this team's floor is a first round exit. Like I think things would have to go very bad for them not to hit that floor. And if you put Ingram in there, and obviously you got to retool the roster to get, not Tristan Thompson as your backup center, and you would need to get another power forward somewhere. But if you got that, I think that if everything lined up, you have a better chance of beating the Celtics this next year. And I think that's reason enough, because even though Donovan signed that extension, the clock will be ticking. You need to make progress. You can't be we lost in a 7-game first round series. Like if that happened, you're good. The whole cycle is going to start all back over. And I know everyone's going to talk about like the cap constraints and stuff like that, but what you need to be worried about is getting Donovan Mitchell to believe in this team going forward in the future of this team. So next year really matters, in the year after that. And if Ingram gives you a better chance to do that, then I think you make that move. And then when we're looking 3 years down the road, it's likely that Allen and LeVert, if they were both still on the Cavs, would be making the same amount of money as Ingram at that point in time. And if that's the case, then any cap constraint shouldn't be the reason why you don't make the move, because you're going to get there. It's just 2 years down the road. So that all considered, that's why I think you do it, even if it just bumps up your ceiling just a little bit, because that's what you need. Like, you need the ceiling to be bumped up, and it's not going to lower the floor. Like, there's no situation where the Brandon Ingram thing really doesn't work out and this team misses the playoffs. Like, that's not going to happen.
Yeah, that won't happen. Yeah.
Right.
No, I agree.
That's
I agree.
That's
I'll let you finish.
That's where I'm at with this, where if there's even a chance of him putting you up higher, I think it's worth it. And what's baked into that, and I think is really important, is it forces Mobley to develop. And we always say Mobley is the key. Like, if Mobley became a top 15 player, everything changes. The Cavs can, make the finals with this core, etc. But what's the best way for him to do that? Is the best way for him to do that playing power forward and splitting his time with center? Because, he basically split his time 50-50 this year, 50% with Allen, 50% without Allen. Like, would it be better just to do 100% center? Would that make him a better player? And if the answer is yes, then you got to do that, because that's what's going to raise your ceiling more than anything. So that's my take.
I think everything that you said is fair. I agree. The clock is definitely ticking, even though Mitchell signed that extension. I understand the urgency 100% there. You're not wrong. I have a slightly different take in just that I agree the floor doesn't change. I don't think the ceiling, I don't think Brandon Ingram is a player who's going to push you over the top. And so for me, I would be more comfortable. The Allen for Ingram swap is something I could get talked into. But for me right now, I would be more comfortable waiting until maybe the trade deadline or even next summer, someone who legitimately could push you over the top becomes available on the trade block. Now, I would have to look at who, what situation could potentially pan out. But I just don't think Ingram is a guy that you don't need to go get a Brandon Ingram right now. I think you could wait, run it back with this core. If something emerges at the deadline or next summer, since you have Mitchell's extension, you have breathing room to do that. If Mitchell had said, hey, we need to make changes right now or I'm not extending, then have Jarrett Allen, welcome to New Orleans. But right now, I would operate with a little bit of patience. But again, you're not wrong. I understand the urgency.
I think that if you look at everything and your conclusion is it doesn't move the needle up high enough, then I don't think you make the trade. But one thing that's really important to consider is that we were just talking about, teams are like, nobody wants, you're bidding against other teams during this whole process. And, there's not a lot of teams that want to give up a good wing for Jarrett Allen. Like, if the Cavs called the Nets and said, we'll give you Jarrett Allen for Cam Johnson, they'd probably say yes. But in reality, Cam Johnson's nowhere near the caliber of player that Jarrett Allen is. So that's where it's really tough, where it's really hard to find it's really hard to find a situation where somebody is as skilled as Jarrett Allen is, but on the wing, and if that player became available, they would accept them. Would the Raptors have said, yes, we'd rather take Jarrett Allen in a OG Anunoby trade? I don't think they do. And I think Jarrett Allen's still a step above OG Anunoby, but you could talk yourself into it because because he would have been such a good fit, all those things. So that's where it's just really, really tough. And it's like, Brandon Ingram is really good, but there's very obvious flaws in his game, and there's reasons why, teams are kind of staying away from him. And he's not a safe bet, not in any way, but he is the most skilled player I think that you could ever get with Jarrett Allen. And if the bet hits and he does click with his team, and that's a lot of ifs. So it's not like it's a sure thing.
It's a risk. Either way, it's a risk.
Right. It would be a huge risk, but you can see it paying off. Like, the Ringer has him as the 35th best player in the league, and he's not the 35th best fit in the league. Like, that's for sure, because Mikal Bridges was ranked the 50th best player. Obviously, this is just a stupid list, but it just kind of illustrates that fit is so important with how we perceive guys, and the fit with their current teams also influences how we perceive their fit with their potential next team. And it's like, I know Ingram didn't work when he was next to LeBron, but he was about 20, 21 years old. Ingram didn't fit with Zion, but probably not a good team for him to ever showcase his skills, or at least it allowed him to showcase his skills, but it didn't put him in a position that he would need to be in. Like, he's the primary ball handler. He's the really only scorer. Like, CJ McCollum is not Portland CJ McCollum anymore. So it's just, like, you have to try to see things differently. I guess, there is a path there. That's all that I'm saying.
I see the path. I want to be clear, because I have been very anti-Ingram compared to. Well, it's funny that you brought it up too, because I did see the tweets today of like Cavs fans are higher on Ingram than most other teams. That I don't know. I don't know.
I don't think anybody's high on Brandon Ingram.
Very high on Ingram.
No.
I think there's both. There's both sides. There's some people who are really high on him. There's some people who absolutely despise him. I think people would probably lump me into that latter one, but I'm really not. I see the path where Ingram, he plays the wing. He's a perfect fit in that regard. I will push back a little bit. Perfect fit is a little bit too far, because he doesn't have he's tall, but he doesn't have size, if that makes sense.
Right.
A hypothetical that I threw out there is like, are you better equipped to defend Boston with Brandon Ingram because he's a wing, or would it be better if you had a Jarrett Allen and Evan Mobley?
I think where it would get better is you have multiple playmakers on the court, multiple guys who can attack off the dribble in a spaced out court.
That's the argument.
And that's where you get Evan Mobley attacking Porzingis or attacking Horford one-on-one in like a 5-out situation. Mm-hmm. That's where everybody, I think, becomes a lot better. And people are going to say, well, I don't know if you know this, but Isaac Okoro shot better from 3. Well, I don't know if you know this, but Brandon Ingram's like 900 times better than Isaac Okoro. Mm-hmm. And yes, he's not a catch-and-shoot 3-point guy. It's stupid in year 7 or 8 to be like, well, maybe he can become Mikal Bridges, because if he was going to become Mikal Bridges, he would have became Mikal Bridges. Yeah. But you can refine his skill set. He's so much more skilled than Bridges. He's he's a really good ball handler. He would be close to Garland in the best playmaker on the team, I think. And he's really good in that department. And he's really good at manipulating pick and rolls. He's really good at feeding bigs. And it's like, man, they need that, because you know who's not good at doing those things? Donovan Mitchell. And so it's like,
well, Mitchell has grown a lot as a player.
He's grown, but Ingram's better. So it's just like, there's ways where it can fit, even if it's not the same as like, oh, this is like a 3-and-D guy. He's going to stand in the corner and hit 45% from 3 from there, and everything clicks. So that's where I'm saying, if you think that he at all bumps up your ceiling, it's not a risk in my mind.
That's basically what I would say. That's what it comes down to. How much do you think Brandon Ingram raises the ceiling? I think there's a case for both sides of it. You seem to think he raises the ceiling a little higher than I do, and that's, like I said, I don't think either one of us is wrong. I think a lot of times in the NBA space, just sports in general, people talk so declarative. Like, it depends, man. I don't know. I don't know how Brandon Ingram would fit in Cleveland. Maybe it would work. Maybe they win a championship next season, and Brandon Ingram is like what they were missing. I personally am a little lower on him, but I understand why, if you believe in that, you would take that gamble.
And there's a reason why you should be lower. And I said if like 500 times when talking about Brandon Ingram. But also, if this current core of the Cavs, takes it to the next level, that's a lot of ifs involved too. If Evan Mobley develops as a 3-point shooter, if Jarrett Allen does, becomes better handling the ball, there's a lot of other ifs that it's not like it's not like what the Cavs currently have is a sure thing. So that's where I think that it's worth it because he would be more of a ceiling raiser as opposed to like a floor raiser. So, like you could, yeah. So it's just tough because guys who are 6'8", 6'9" don't really come available very often. And when they do, every team wants them because, you can't have enough wings. You literally cannot have enough wings.
It's true. And it is, to that point, this is one of the rare times where a 6'8", 6'9" forward is available and his asking price isn't that high. So as I'm someone who might be more patient and waiting for another option, but you might not get a cheaper option if you're going to buy low on someone and hope that you can get the most out of him. This is a pretty good option.
It's tough also with Allen because he has 2 years left on his deal next year and
Allen's
the following
year.
Might
never be higher.
Because if you go through the deadline, it's tough to say, okay, well, he's making 20 million now, but he's going to be making closer to 30, 35 million. Like Hartenstein just got 29 million per. Like that's probably in line with who he's going to be, compared to in terms of his next contract. So it's going to be a lot tougher to move Allen on $35 million a year, even if the cap does spike, than it is to move him at $20 million and you have him for 2 years guaranteed at that price. So that's where I think it's just a really, really tough situation. And there's no easy choice because it's, if they as somebody who is a proponent of the Brandon Ingram trade, it could blow up in 8 seconds. And it's we're talking in November and you're why were we so behind? Why was I so behind this? This is the dumbest thing ever. But also, if you could also see a situation where it's the offense moves a little better, but they still kind of have all the same issues because it's all the same guys. So, we could be saying that in November too.
I can't wait to find out what it'll be, honestly. I'm really interested to see how they approach the rest of this offseason and what the fallout of that will be. Now, I do want to round this out very, very quickly with a couple of the available free agents. Honestly, just going to throw 3 names at you and we'll get your quick takes on them. First guy is going to be super easy. Maybe not easy for you to go quick on, but Cedi Osman's still out there. Are we down? Are we still down? We said yes last time.
Yeah, of course, we're still down.
Nothing's changed.
You still need a 3-4, but
yep.
You'll take another 2-3, I guess. At least he's more of a 3 than some of the other 2-3s.
Yeah, I think he's a legit 3 on this roster. I would say he's a legit 3 for them.
He fits a lot better in with what Atkinson can, his type of offense. He cuts. He's a really good off-ball mover. He can dribble the ball some. I'm not going to say I watched a ton of Spurs last year, but he finished a lot better at the rim. Yeah. Finishing at the rim has been a really big issue, and he's kind of steadily improved it. So he was really good last year in that category. So I think there's definitely something there. I mean, he's not gonna cost you the full mid-level, because if he did, other teams would have already grabbed him.
Yeah, listen, he's always going to be inconsistent, but those Osman outbursts are very much needed on this roster right now. They could use a guy like that. Another person who we really didn't talk much about last time, who I've talked myself more into, would be Saddiq Bey. This is another buy low, potentially get the most out of him. I think you put him in a winning environment, that could help him shine. Now, something that I want to mention that I failed to mention in the Fear the Sword article, as well as my recent video that I did today, he is coming off an ACL tear in March. Now, knock on wood, he's 25. ACL tears are not what they used to be. He could be back by December or January. Now, something that's important to note, maybe he doesn't get to full shape this season. The good news is the NBA, as long as I know, knock on wood, doesn't plan on ending next year. If Saddiq Bey rounds out to full form, then following season, and you get a legit 6'7", 3-and-D wing out of it, you can't have enough of them. So that's something that I would feel happy if the Cavs took a bet on that.
I would too. One of the things that I do think is important is you want to get playable minutes out of this mid-level exception, and Bey wouldn't be playable minutes even when he does come back. The first year after an ACL is usually pretty rough, even for the best of the best. So, I don't know how helpful he would be this next season, but if you're really trying to, as we kind of mentioned earlier, the Cavs need to hit a couple home runs somewhere, and you could talk yourself into this being a home run if everything lined up perfectly. So, I mean, yeah, I'd be for it.
Yeah, that's what I talked myself into. Is before I was a lot lower on the idea of it even being a potential home run swing. Of course, it would probably take a year for you to actually see the reap the benefits of it. But I foresee a path where he, by next season, the following year, I mean, would be the starting 3-and-D wing that they've needed. Not nowhere near Brandon Ingram level wing, of course, is not what I'm saying. But if you kept the core four together, I think he could start on that team pretty easily.
Right? Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree.
And so I'm going to throw two more players at you actually. One player who we did not talk about last time, Caleb Martin. Not sure what his price range is going to be, but if you manage to get him for the MLE, I think he's a fantastic fit on paper, athletic. He elevates his game in the playoffs. He's tough. He works off ball. I think he's just a winning player. Cavs could use more of those. He's got that dog in him. They say they need more dogs, or else how are we going to keep our name for the podcast? George Niang cannot be the dog. Something's wrong if he is your enforcer. Okay, so we need a real dog on the roster.
More of a private school bully than he is an enforcer, but that's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not as high on him as you are, but he is somebody who
he would start, I think.
Probably, which is also a problem. But it gives you another playable player, and I think if we're talking about like you want to get sure things, I think that's something that you want. He's not as good of a shooter as you would hope that he was, and I think that's kind of limits him a little bit. In like the same way that like Max Strus is like, man, he should be like, if Max Strus was like a 37% 3-point shooter, he'd be he'd be making so much more money. Yeah. So, and I think kind of like Caleb Martin kind of falls in that same category.
Last guy who a lot of Cavs Twitter is falling in love with now. I know I said this before. I didn't watch the Pistons play basketball. I didn't watch much of Utah Jazz last year. So if you're not too familiar with this guy either, it's okay. I'll give you the pass. But Simone Fontecchio, fantastic fit on paper, size, shoots the lights out. I would give up assets for him if it became necessary. Now, Karis LeVert for him might be pushing it a little bit, but I think I could talk myself into it. I don't know where you stand on him. He is a restricted free agent, which is important to note here because it might not be as simple as just signing him. You might have to give up something. But on paper, he fits seamlessly. So where do you stand on Fontecchio?
I like him. I think it would be he's somebody who would definitely be in the rotation, and I think if you're doing that, that's where you would have him. I mean, like you need to get a guy in the rotation. I know we just talked about Sadiq Bey, but you know, like if you're and especially if you're like trading assets for him, he needs a for sure play. One of the things I think is tough is he came over really late in his career,
28,
and he's been on really bad teams, so it can be tough to project like what do those numbers mean in a winning context. So there's a lot of uncertainty there, but if you think that okay, what he does in these terrible contexts translates perfectly to what, you know, the Cavs need, then it's like, yeah, I think he would definitely be worth going all out for. One of the things that's always helpful is that if you plan on keeping the front court, which by all accounts it seems like they want to, like you wrote something about on Fear the Sword the other day about Jarrett Allen, Wendy saying that he thinks that he's going to stay in Cleveland. So you have a little more flexibility as to who you play on the wing, and I think that somebody with size like Fontecchio, I think he kind of fits in really well with what the Cavs have. So he would probably be my preferred target on this list. I mean, that's not really saying much, but you can definitely talk yourself into it and say, well, maybe that all translates over to a winning context, and it might, but it also might not. So that's kind of the thing.
That's the question mark, is that it is kind of strange for a player that old to be relatively an unknown. It looks like it translates, but think about Utah Watanabe last year. He's on Brooklyn. You're going, oh my God, this guy's shooting the lights out. If a contender picks him up and then Phoenix gets him and he can't stay on the floor. So you never know.
Yeah.
Good stats on bad teams are tough to predict, especially with someone who has never been on a winning team in the NBA at least. But
And
it's very easy to talk yourself into it.
And is that old because he's more like the Sam Merrill camp where like you don't expect Sam Merrill's not a young guy. You don't expect him to like, oh, he's going to be so much better this next year. It's like, this is kind of who he is, and it's whether or not you can utilize him. So, that's where you kind of have to trust your scouting and what you're kind of seeing with your eyes. And as we mentioned, we're not watching enough Jazz and Pistons games to do that.
Yeah, I want to be as transparent as possible. I have barely watched this guy play, so I can't sit here and have a strong opinion on him. I'll leave that for the Utah Jazz fans who watch the podcast, because I'm sure Jackson has brought in many of them.
He is really, for like whatever reason, I got his shot down in 2K because like you have to play with the different tiered teams like online. So I would play with the Jazz. I got his shot down, so that's
young Bull fan. Jackson's go-to.
Well, more so like Lowry, but unfortunately, if you run a bunch of pick and rolls with Lowry, he gets really tired. So he has kind of the Doc Rivers, Damian Lillard problem. If you use him running the ball, but we can talk about that later.
Yeah, we can talk about that later. Jackson spams pick and roll in 2K. You heard it here first.
It's okay,
I do too. It's the best way to play. As long as you're not doing the zigzag, momentum boost, shift, and all that back and forth on the screen. Play basketball if you're a 2K player. There's a difference between playing 2K and playing basketball. I hate when people play 2K. If you know what I'm trying to say.
I also one thing that I do that I do feel bad about doing is I just post up Luka every time I play with the Mavs. It's okay. because he's like a point guard, and if they don't like switch it up, it's like, oh yeah, he's like posting up Devin Booker. It's like bucket, So.
Yeah, see, you're playing basketball. Some people don't play 2K like a basketball simulator. They play like an arcade game, and it frustrates.
Well, I mean, it is a video game. It is a video game, so I'm not gonna get mad at that. I just get mad because they don't like the CPU doesn't move off ball well, so it's just really tough to like play real basketball because it's like I cut this guy. Anyways, so.
Yeah. Well, on that note, that's going to do it for this episode of the Junkyard Pod. You all know the drill by now. If you want to support the channel, like, subscribe, leave a comment, all that good stuff. And with that being said, go Cavs.
I agree. Go Cavs. Brian, can you drop your Xbox gamer tag in the comments?